Welcome back. It's really quite striking when you think about how that period, roughly 1750 to 1900, just completely reshaped everything.
It really did. We're talking about industrialization, kicking into high gear, and, well, directly fueling this massive wave of empire building.
Yeah, unprecedented scale, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It wasn't just about grabbing land. It fundamentally restructured global power dynamics. Industrial power meant imperial power in this era.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're working from our AP World History Unit 6 review. It's pretty comprehensive.
It covers a lot of ground, yeah. The reasons behind imperialism, how states actually expanded.
The reactions from people on the ground, how the global economy changed, this idea of economic imperialism.
And all the migration happening, too. It's a big chunk of the course, right?
Yeah,
About 12 to 15% of the exam.
that's right. So it's definitely significant.
And our mission here isn't to get lost in every single battle or treaty.
No, definitely not. We want to pull up the main ideas, the connections, get the big picture of this massive transformation, broad strokes.
Exactly. Focus on the overarching themes.
Okay, let's kick things off with the why. What was actually driving this push for empire? Section 6.1 in the review looks at the rationales.
And it's interesting because the old God, gold, and glory motivations, while maybe still there in the background, were kind of overtaken by newer justifications.
Right, justifications that sometimes ironically grew out of Enlightenment ideas.
That's a key point. Things like reason and rights get twisted a bit.
Like nationalism. On one hand, it's this powerful force for unity, think Italy or Germany becoming nations.
But at another side,
Yeah, this competitive side. Believing your nation was superior and that having a bigger empire proved it, suddenly empire size equals status.
and with newly unified countries like Germany and Italy wanting to prove themselves, the competition just heats up, doesn't it? The established powers felt they had to keep expanding just to keep up.
Then you get into some really uncomfortable territory with ideas like scientific racism.
Yeah, this is where they tried to use science, and I use that term loosely.
Very loosely. Like phrenology measuring skulls to supposedly determine intelligence.
Right, creating these hierarchies with Europeans conveniently at the top. It was flawed science used to justify prejudice and domination. Even though phrenology itself was debunked later, the damage was done in terms of justifying rule over so-called child races.
And building on that, you had social Darwinism,
Taking Darwin's survival of the fittest
which was about biology.
and misapplying it to entire human societies.
Mhm.
The argument went, look, Western industrial nations are successful, therefore they're superior and should dominate.
It's a convenient justification for inequality, isn't it? Framing dominance as like natural law.
It really is. It gave a sort of intellectual cover for what was often brutal expansion.
And lastly, the civilizing mission.
Ah, yes, the paternalistic idea. We have a duty to bring our superior ways, our religion, our government, our culture to these lower societies.
Whether they wanted it or not.
Exactly. And often, civilizing meant stamping out indigenous cultures, languages, and traditions.
Yeah.
It raises that big question. Who gets to define civilized?
Right.
Often just a mask for self-interest.
Okay, so with these justifications in place, the race for territory really takes off. That brings us to section 6.2, state expansion. The world map changes dramatically.
Yeah, the focus shifts geographically too. Less focus on the Americas compared to earlier periods, and much more intense competition in Africa, plus more activity in Asia and Southeast Asia.
And new players get involved.
Right. It's not just the old guard like Britain, France, the Netherlands. Now you have Germany, Italy, Belgium, even the US and Japan getting in on the act. Spain and Portugal's influence is waning.
And how they controlled these places changed too, right? A shift from private companies to direct state control.
That's a key trend. Think of King Leopold II in the Congo. His personal, brutal exploitation for ivory and rubber caused such an outcry that the Belgian government eventually had to step in and take over.
Similar things happened with the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, leading to state control in Indonesia and India. It was often about resource extraction and trade, but also managing corruption or rebellion.
And expansion happened through different means, sometimes diplomacy, sometimes outright warfare.
The Berlin Conference is the classic example of diplomacy, quote unquote.
Right. European powers carving up Africa amongst themselves, with zero African representation. Those lines drawn on a map had massive consequences down the line. ignoring existing ethnic and political realities.
We see Britain expanding in West Africa, France grabbing chunks of North Africa, starting with that odd fly swatter incident in Algeria.
And Belgium, as we said, in the Congo.
Then there were the settler colonies.
Yeah, places like Australia and New Zealand for Britain, where large numbers of Europeans moved in, displacing indigenous populations, the Aborigines and Maori, often through disease and conflict, creating these sort of neo-European societies.
And imperialism wasn't just Europeans grabbing overseas land.
Good point. The United States pushed westward under Manifest Destiny, displacing Native Americans like the Cherokee through policies like the Indian Removal Act.
Russia expanded eastward and south into Central Asia, especially after the Crimean War, driven partly by Pan-Slavism.
And Japan, after the Meiji Restoration, started its own imperial expansion into Korea, Manchuria, parts of China. It shows this was a global phenomenon driven by similar pressures.
So states are expanding aggressively, but people didn't just passively accept this, did they? Section 6.3 looks at indigenous responses.
Absolutely not. Resistance was widespread and took many forms.
What fueled it?
Well, partly it was the spread of Enlightenment ideas about rights and sovereignty, ironically often introduced through Western education systems imposed by the colonizers themselves.
Huh. Using the master's tools, so to speak?
Kind of. Plus, a growing sense of local or national identity nationalism again, but this time against the imperial power, reacting to having foreign rule and culture imposed on them.
So what did resistance look like? There was direct resistance, right? Armed struggle.
Definitely. You have figures like Tupac Amaru II leading a major rebellion against Spanish abuses in Peru.
Or Samori Touré fighting the French for years in West Africa, even building his own empire for a time.
And the Ya Asantewaa War in West Africa, where an Asante queen mother led resistance against the British, trying to seize their symbolic golden stool.
And of course, the massive Sepoy Rebellion in India in 1857 against the British East India Company, sparked by cultural and religious grievances. That was a turning point, leading to direct British rule.
Right. But resistance wasn't always direct fighting. Sometimes it involved creating new states.
Like in the Balkans, as the Ottoman Empire weakened, new nations emerged there.
Exactly. Or the Sokoto Caliphate in modern-day Nigeria, an Islamic reformist state established before the British eventually conquered it.
And the Cherokee Nation in the U.S. tried assimilation and creating a state structure modeled on the U.S.
Before being forcibly removed on the Trail of Tears, eventually reestablishing a government in Oklahoma. And you have the Zulu kingdom under Shaka, which became a powerful force resisting British expansion, leading to the Anglo-Zulu War.
There was also religious resistance, wasn't there? Movements inspired by spiritual beliefs.
Yes, definitely. The ghost dance movement among Native Americans was a spiritual response to displacement, tragically ending at Wounded Knee.
In South Africa, the Xhosa cattle killing movement was based on a prophecy that sacrificing cattle would drive out the Europeans.
Sadly, it led to famine and made British conquest easier. And then the Mahdist Wars in Sudan, led by Muhammad Ahmad, who claimed to be the Mahdi, fighting against Egyptian and later British control.
So a huge range of responses, showing people actively trying to shape their own destiny.
Absolutely. These resistance movements, even when defeated militarily, often planted the seeds for later independence movements in the 20th century.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the economy. All this political change was obviously tied to massive economic shifts. Section 6.4, Global Economic Development.
This is crucial. The core change is the shift in many colonized regions away from growing food mainly for themselves, subsistence farming towards producing things specifically for export.
Right, becoming export economies,
Yeah.
supplying the factories and markets of the industrialized nations.
Exactly. Industrial powers needed vast amounts of raw materials. Think cotton Egypt's production boomed, especially when the American Civil War cut off U.S. supplies,
Rubber became vital for industrial uses.
leading to brutal forced labor systems in the Amazon, and especially the Congo Basin under Leopold.
Palm oil from West Africa, often using enslaved labor initially.
Guano bird droppings from Peru and Chile as fertilizer.
Seems glamorous. And meat from Argentina and Uruguay, made possible by refrigerated ships.
And diamonds from Africa, with figures like Cecil Rhodes and De Beers dominating the industry.
Plus, the growing cities in Europe needed food, driving demand for cash crops and that meat we mentioned.
And the economic effect. Well, the profits from selling these raw materials often went straight back to the imperial powers to buy their manufactured goods.
Creating a cycle of dependency.
Precisely. Colonial economies were restructured to serve outside interests, often hindering their own diversified development.
This leads nicely into Section 6.5, Economic Imperialism. This is where you don't necessarily need direct political control to exert power, right?
Exactly. Economic imperialism is about one state controlling another through economic leverage, finance, trade, investment.
China is a prime example here, isn't it, with the Opium Wars?
Absolutely. Britain forced China to accept illegal opium imports to fix the trade imbalance. China resisted, lost the wars, and was forced into the unequal Treaty of Nanjing,
Which opened ports, gave Britain special privileges.
and ultimately weakened the Qing dynasty, contributing to internal rebellions like the Taiping Rebellion. Eventually, China was carved into spheres of influence by Western powers, Russia, and Japan, who all had economic control over different regions.
And it wasn't just China. Think about British influence in Latin America.
Right, like in the Port of Buenos Aires in Argentina. Britain invested heavily in things like railways.
But mainly to get Argentinian raw materials out efficiently to Britain.
Yeah, it tied Argentina's economy very closely to British interests, creating economic dependence without direct rule.
And this period saw specific commodities becoming central to this economic web.
Opium, as we mentioned, flowing to China,
Right.
cotton from South Asia and Egypt to Europe, palm oil from Africa to Europe, copper from Chile. These global trade networks were often structured to benefit the imperial powers most.
Okay, so we have political expansion, economic restructuring, and all of this is happening in an increasingly interconnected world, which leads to people moving. Section 6.6, causes of migration.
Huge movements of people in this era, driven by a mix of factors.
What were some of the main drivers?
Well, environmental causes played a role. Europe's population was booming, leading to land shortages and unemployment, pushing people out.
And famine, of course. The Irish potato famine is the classic, tragic example causing mass emigration.
Then you have technology. New, cheaper transport like railroads, and especially steamships, made long-distance migration feasible for many more people, both within countries and across oceans.
Allowing for things like Japanese agricultural workers moving to the Pacific Islands or Hawaii.
Exactly. Or Lebanese merchants setting up shop in the Americas, Italian industrial workers heading to Argentina.
Uh-huh.
And crucially, these technologies also made return migration possible for some.
But the biggest driver was probably economic, right? People seeking work.
Overwhelmingly, yes. Millions voluntarily migrated, looking for jobs. Think of the waves of Irish, Italians, Germans heading to America's industrial centers, or Chinese laborers building railroads there.
And skilled workers moved too, like British engineers going out to manage projects in South Asia and Africa.
But not all migration was voluntary. Coerced labor continued, like the Atlantic slave trade earlier in this period, though it declined. And convict labor Britain, sending prisoners to Australia, France, to places like French Guiana,
And then there's something in between, semi-coerced labor.
right, like indentured servitude. People contracted to work for a fixed period, often in harsh conditions, to pay off their passage. Huge numbers of Indian laborers moved across the British Empire under this system, and Chinese laborers went to places like Malaysian tin mines.
So all these people moving around must have had huge effects, which is section 6.7.
Massive effects, yes, on both the societies they left and the ones they arrived in.
What happened back home?
Often you saw gender imbalances. It was primarily men who migrated for work, leaving women behind to take on roles in farming or managing households that were traditionally male. Family structures changed.
And in the places they moved to?
Migrants often clustered together, forming ethnic enclaves, Chinatowns, Little Italies.
Right, places where they could maintain their language, food, religion, culture.
Exactly. These enclaves became hubs of cultural diffusion, but also sometimes faced hostility from the host society.
Which brings us to nativism.
Yeah, this backlash against immigrants, a policy or attitude favoring the native-born population, often fueled by prejudice, racism, fear of cultural difference, economic competition.
Even though immigrants were often crucial to the economy.
Absolutely. But you saw things like the marginalization of the Irish in the U.S., and eventually government policies explicitly restricting immigration.
Like the Chinese Exclusion Act in the U.S. in 1882.
That's a key example.
Yeah.
And the White Australia policy starting around 1901, explicitly discriminatory policies based on race or origin.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, section 6.8 is about causation in the imperial age, pulling the threads together.
It's about understanding the interplay, the core causes. Well, industrialization created the need for raw materials and markets. Capitalism provided the drive.
Nationalism and political competition provided the motive.
Ideologies like social Darwinism and the civilizing mission provided the justification.
And new technologies, weapons, transport, communication, medicine, like quinine, provided the means.
Right, and the effects were profound and long-lasting.
Yeah. Loss of sovereignty for colonized peoples, obviously. Different forms of control, direct rule, protectorates, spheres of influence.
Economic restructuring, as we discussed,
Yeah.
turning colonies into export economies, often damaging local industries and creating dependency.
Huge social and cultural impacts imposing Western languages, education, norms, creating racial hierarchies.
Demographic changes through migration, both forced and voluntary. Urbanization.
And, as we saw, the rise of resistance movements challenging imperial control.
It's a complex web of cause and effect.
So looking back at 1750 to 1900, the big takeaway is this intense global transformation. It's all interconnected industrialization fuels imperialism, which leads to new ideologies, new ways of controlling territory, resistance, economic upheaval, and massive movements of people.
Absolutely. You can't really understand the modern world without grasping the dynamics of this period. Its legacies, political boundaries, economic relationships, cultural interactions, lingering inequalities are still very much with us.
It really makes you think when you consider everything we've touched on, the reasons why it happened, the ways empires expanded, the incredible variety of resistance, the lasting economic and social consequences. What stands out most to you? Is there one aspect that feels particularly significant or maybe even surprising? Something definitely worth mulling over.
It is. And maybe the question to leave everyone with is, looking around today in our supposedly post-colonial interconnected world, where do you still see the echoes, the reverberations of this age of imperialism playing out?